I was halfway through approving our final holiday campaign calendar when the email hit. Subject line: immediate alignment on brand voice. It had that nauseating, pre-chewed tone of someone who thought synergy meant deleting history. I clicked it, skimmed it, and there it was. As part of our rebranding initiative, all legacy assets will be reviewed for strategic fit. Strategic fit, my ass. I'd spent 7 years building that brand from scratch. From napkin sketches to global identity. Every tagline, every hex code, every DNS record still pulsed with my fingerprints. And now, some agency-polished CMO, fresh from selling cruelty-free lipstick to teenagers, had decided I wasn't the flavor of the month. What really stung wasn't the review itself. It was that I'd been blindsided. No one spoke to me, no heads up, just an email dropped into my inbox like a grenade dressed as a calendar invite. That's when the dread settled in my chest. Slow, heavy, like wet cement. The kind that tells you, without a single word, that you're being erased. Not fired, not reprimanded, just slowly, surgically replaced. Before we dive further, if you've ever watched someone dismantle your life's work with a smile, or if you've ever felt that silent, sinking, why wasn't I enough? Do me a small favor. Tap that subscribe button and like the video. It really does help this team keep telling stories that corporate would rather we forget. Thanks for supporting the voices they try to scrub out. By Friday, I was off the brand task force entirely. My access to campaign assets was paused for re-evaluation. When I asked for clarification, the new CMO, Madison, a woman who wore ironic blazers and talked like every sentence ended in a pitch deck, said I should focus on internal documentation for now. Translation: go to the attic and organize the boxes while the cool kids paint over the walls. Madison had arrived like a storm in a perfume ad. All surface, no soul. She said things like zeitgeist and aesthetic coherence without ever mentioning our actual customers, most of whom were women over 35 who didn't give a damn about whether our brand sparked joy. Within her first week, she fired the photographer who had been with us since year one and brought in a TikTok skincare bro with a DeVito tattoo and a ring light. I wish I were kidding. But nothing said, "You're out," quite like the HR check-in that showed up on my calendar 2 days later. It wasn't labeled disciplinary. It was worse. Quarterly culture review. If you've been in corporate long enough, you know that's code for "we're manufacturing your exit." They brought up the usual nonsense: team energy, alignment, engagement metrics. Then came the final jab. Your tone in cross-functional communications has been described as overly pragmatic. Overly pragmatic. For a brand built on trust, clarity, and clean data, I was suddenly too useful to be liked. And I saw it clear as day. I wasn't just being replaced. I was being sterilized out of the origin story. Erased so they could claim this glossy reboot was born fresh from Madison's genius, not from the long, hard years I spent bleeding for it. I went home that night, poured a whiskey, and opened the file folder I hadn't touched since 2016. Original logo sketches, trademark certificate, domain registrar login, DNS hosting keys, all registered to one name, mine. They wanted a rebrand. They were about to get one. The conference room smelled like eucalyptus and denial. They'd redecorated over the weekend. Plants no one would water, neon sign that said disrupt, and an acrylic table too clean to trust. Madison sat across from me in her high-waisted trousers and curated empathy expression, the kind you practice in front of a ring light. Her assistant hovered just behind, fingers poised over a brand new MacBook like we were about to live stream a TED Talk, not gut someone's career. Madison folded her hands and opened with a compliment so hollow it echoed. "You've been here since the beginning. We truly value everything you've built." And then, like a guillotine in a sundress. "But we're pivoting towards something a little more elevated, more Gen Z adjacent. You know how it is. You're not quite the culture fit anymore." I watched her face as she said it. Not a flicker of doubt, just the glow of someone who thought branding was feelings and fonts, not blood and servers. She slid a manila envelope across the table with a performative gentleness, like she was placing a child into foster care. Inside, a severance packet and a non-compete that read like a preemptive confession. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted to make sure I couldn't rise again. She expected tears, maybe outrage, or maybe just quiet resignation. Instead, I leaned back, crossed one leg over the other, and said calmly, "You'll need to coordinate with legal for the brand transfer." Her assistant paused typing. "What brand transfer?" I smiled. Oh, I'll send over the documentation. Madison blinked. Once, twice. The kind of blink people do when their brain is booting up a realization it's never had to consider before. I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. Some vague recollection of a Slack thread about domain renewals or a conversation she only half listened to in onboarding. She had no clue what I meant, and it rattled her. But she played it cool, nodded slowly, like she was pretending to understand, and said, "Perfect. Just loop in Brian from legal when you get a chance." Brian from legal would be the first of many to dig through my original licensing agreement and find the clause. The one I had written, the one I had filed, the one nobody had bothered to revise because, surprise, I wasn't just the brand manager. I was the architect of the entire digital presence. And I'd done it all before this company had an LLC, an HR department, or a CMO with 80,000 Instagram followers and a contract that read like a shampoo bottle. The assistant walked me out like I was a guest at my own funeral. I passed the influencer they'd hired to replace me on the way back to my desk. All cheekbones, oversized hoodie, and that blank stare of someone who'd never manually edited a sitemap in her life. She was talking to our videographer about manifesting brand synergy. I didn't even slow down. Back at my desk, I packed up in silence. I left the files on the shared drive, sure. But the roots, the domains, the hosting access, the legal IP, those lived somewhere else. Somewhere they'd never bothered to look. As I walked out, badge clutched in one hand and manila envelope in the other, I passed the glossy new poster taped to the wall outside Madison's office. It read, "Own the narrative." I nearly laughed. They had no idea who still owned theirs. My home office still smelled like printer ink and resentment. I hadn't changed a thing since the early days. Same chipped desk, same crooked corkboard, same coffee ring on the corner of my keyboard tray from the night I stayed up until 4 a.m., designing the original logo on a 10-year-old laptop with a cracked hinge and dreams bigger than my apartment. That logo ended up on everything from trade show banners to investor decks. They built their empire on it. And now they wanted to pretend I was just some employee with a Canva login. I sat down, cracked my knuckles, and opened the fireproof box I hadn't touched since the last round of funding. Inside, 3 USB drives, a folder of notarized filings, and a spiral-bound notebook with "Do Not Delete" scribbled across the cover in Sharpie. I flipped through each page with the same kind of reverence you'd give a sacred text. There it was, my original 2016 trademark filing. Registered under my personal name, with a personal LLC I had set up back when I was still coding our first landing page from a shared Wi-Fi signal in a Starbucks parking lot. I'd filed it before we had payroll, before we had investors, before we had a single customer. Next came the domain name, purchased through my personal account, hosted on servers I paid for with freelance money and ramen budget leftovers. The DNS keys, the MX records, the SSL certificates, all mine. Not the company's, not the board's, mine. And buried inside a folder labeled License Agreement Final was the masterstroke, a licensing contract I drafted and signed with our original founding team when they formalized the company. Back then, we were scrappy and grateful, and everyone respected what we each brought to the table. So I proposed a simple deal. They could use everything I built, logo, name, domain, content, tone, under a perpetual license. The only condition? I stayed on board. Clause 9b. Rights revert to original holder upon termination of engagement. That sentence was my insurance policy, my lifeboat. And now, my nuclear option. The best part? No one had ever asked to renegotiate it. Not during Series A, not during the merger, not when Madison swaggered in with her LinkedIn-approved vision boards and iced matcha smugness. They assumed ownership came with time. It didn't. They were tenants squatting on my intellectual property, and the lease had just ended. I logged into the registrar. The domain was still active, still set to auto-renew under my personal billing profile. I checked the trademark, valid, untouched, still linked to the same LLC, my LLC. I scanned the license agreement again, heart pounding like a war drum, and smiled at the final paragraph. Any lapse in payment or breach of employment continuity shall trigger immediate suspension of brand usage rights. Immediate. Not negotiable, not retroactive, immediate. They'd terminated me without cause. No buyout, no reassignment, no transfer of rights, just a boot out the door and a non-compete that assumed I had nothing left to leverage. But they didn't just forget who I was, they forgot what I still owned. I wasn't going to sue. I wasn't going to rage post. I didn't need revenge. All I had to do was wait for the clock to run out. Then press one button. Transfer. The office was buzzing that morning with fake enthusiasm and overpriced coffee. Madison had announced the upcoming Brand Reawakening Summit in an all-hands Zoom that felt more like a hostage video with highlighter-colored slide decks. I didn't attend. No point pretending I was still part of the story they were rewriting without me. I showed up an hour early instead. No fanfare, no grand speech. Just me, my badge, my issued laptop, and a plain manila envelope that held a single piece of paper. I handed it all to the front desk girl, who didn't even know my name. She gave me the practiced smile of someone who thought I was from IT. I waited until she turned to scan the equipment before slipping the envelope into Madison's glass-walled office. She wasn't there yet. The only sound was the click of my heels on the concrete floor and the soft buzz of the air purifier she'd insisted on installing. Inside the envelope, one sentence. Please confirm the updated payment on the trademark license. That was it. No threats, no emotion, just a line of legal text that would mean absolutely nothing to her, until it meant everything. Then I walked out. Back in my car, I pulled up my registrar dashboard. The domain was still active, still resolving properly, still quietly feeding traffic to their servers like nothing had changed. I clicked Edit Contact Details. First name, removed. Company name, removed. Admin email, replaced with my personal encrypted address. Organization, listed as independent owner, license pending. I didn't shut it down, didn't hijack the DNS. Didn't throw a wrench in their operations or post a redirect to something petty. That would have been noise. I didn't want noise, I wanted silence. Cold, corporate, inarguable silence. The kind that doesn't get flagged by IT because it's not a glitch. It's just a change in ownership. Then I opened my billing dashboard and paused the auto-renew license flag. Not canceled, just paused. It would expire on its own unless someone paid it. And since they'd ignored the envelope, since Madison probably hadn't even opened it yet, I knew exactly what would happen. Nothing. They'd keep operating under the assumption that everything still belonged to them, that their little influencer campaign and new era countdown clock sat on solid ground. I poured myself a coffee in my kitchen, logged out of the admin console, and exhaled. Not the exhale of relief, but of calibration. Resetting. I wasn't plotting revenge, I was reclaiming my work. Quietly, elegantly, without ever raising my voice. That's the thing they never understood. I didn't build this brand for applause. I built it for longevity, for meaning, for women like me who'd been told their voice was too sharp, their tone too pragmatic. I didn't need to torch the building to make a point. I just needed to remove the foundation brick by brick until one day they'd look down and realize they were standing on air. No one called, no one emailed, no one confirmed receipt of my note, and I didn't press. I just watched the countdown on the license tick closer to 0. It was surreal, watching them polish the furniture in a house they didn't own. I sat at home with my tea and my receipts, scrolling through the daily deluge of glittery nonsense they posted. Influencer reels, color palette mood boards, rebranded values like authenticity and disruption that meant less than nothing to the women who actually bought our product. They replaced the warm, direct tone I'd honed for years with breathy one-liners and hashtags like #GlowDifferently. Madison even hired some reality TV runner-up to be the new face of the brand, an ex-Bachelor contestant who once got famous for crying over the wrong sushi order. They were pouring everything into this relaunch like they were reviving a fallen empire. Video teasers showed behind-the-scenes clips of influencers sipping oat milk lattes in curated lofts, pretending to work. Billboards started popping up downtown with the new logo, a sterile geometric thing that looked like it belonged on a tech startup that sold empathy as a service. The old brand was gone, scrubbed, sanitized, not a trace of the tone I'd built, the visuals I'd crafted, the trust I'd earned. And still, beneath it all, they were squatting on infrastructure they didn't own. The website still ran through my DNS routing. The hosting account still sat in my LLC's billing portal. Their pre-launch microsite, the email campaign server, even the new merch portal they bragged about. Every digital asset they touched passed through pipelines I had designed and paid for years ago. Quietly, legally, permanently. They hadn't even tried to transfer it. It never occurred to them that they needed to. One night, I got curious and ran a back-end trace on the new site's rollout. Same CDN, same base config I wrote in 2019. They just slapped new fonts on top of my bones and called it innovation. The CSS was still full of my comments. I found a file named marybackup.final.cs buried in the style folder. They hadn't even renamed it. Madison posted a selfie on LinkedIn the next day from a production set. "Incredible day filming our upcoming brand vision piece," the caption said. "Excited to launch a voice that truly speaks to our next generation of customers. Out with the old, in with the revolutionary." I stared at the phrase "out with the old" until the words blurred. She was standing in front of a monitor that displayed the new homepage, the same one still tethered to my personal IP license, the same one that would cease to legally exist in 13 days if no payment was made on the trademark license. I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered how she never once asked me what made the brand resonate in the first place. How she smirked when I handed over my badge. How she bragged in meetings about burning the old playbook. They didn't just forget what I owned. They forgot why it mattered. Their entire launch was a countdown built on a trap they hadn't seen. Every email they sent, every press release, every influencer teaser only drew more attention to something they no longer had the right to use. And they were doing it with the same smug certainty of people who'd never had to build anything from scratch. People who thought branding was vibes and Canva templates, not history, not grit, not code and copyrights and time spent sweating over customer feedback forms at 2 a.m. I didn't gloat. I didn't warn them, I just watched the clock. 11 days. Then 10. They were so loud, and I was so very, very still. The message came through at 8:42 p.m. It was from Elena, one of the last good ones left inside. Senior dev, old school loyal, the kind of woman who kept her head down but remembered who built what. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Just a single line. They're planning a massive live stream launch. Global reveal. Thousands of eyes. I stared at it for a second. My heart didn't race. My palms didn't sweat. I just exhaled, slow, quiet, like I was closing a door gently behind me. Then I clicked into my legal dashboard and pulled up the renewal queue. Trademark license, still unpaid. Due date, 7 days ago. No inquiries, no attempts to renegotiate, not even a late courtesy email from finance. My hands moved with muscle memory. Click, review, confirm. Clause 9b wasn't just about termination. It had an automatic failsafe, buried deep in the usage terms, language written in the plainest legalese you could get away with while still making it enforceable. Failure to submit renewal payment within 5 business days of invoice issuance shall trigger suspension of brand usage rights. Not a suggestion, not a conversation, a trigger. At midnight Eastern Time, the automation I built years ago would process the lapse. It didn't need me to push a button. It had been coded to protect the brand, my brand, before they even knew what a launch calendar was. I checked the clock. 10:03 p.m. In a downtown hotel ballroom somewhere, they were probably running mic checks and adjusting ring lights. The influencer was likely practicing her script in front of a mirror, rehearsing fake tears for a vulnerable moment on camera. Madison was probably sipping champagne in a branded tumbler and bragging to some agency partner about how the future belongs to the bold. And still, their entire future rested on a license they no longer legally held. I opened the trademark registry to monitor the change in real time. The system had already flagged the record. Pending suspension. At 12:01, the record would update to inactive, ownership reversion due to licensing breach. This wasn't revenge. This was procedure. I got up and made tea. Rooibos, no sugar, something quiet. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat back down, watching the quiet wheels of consequence turn. No hacking, no sabotage, just a lapse, an omission, a consequence of forgetting who signed what and why. They had assumed branding was aesthetic, that the paint on the outside mattered more than the deeds underneath. At 11:57, I got another message from Elena. They just ran a live dress rehearsal. Your name popped up in the staging metadata. I don't think they even noticed. Of course they didn't. They'd pulled every surface element into their new identity, except the spine, the name, the trademark, the legitimacy. I typed back, "Let them launch. Nothing they're using belongs to them after midnight." She replied with a single period. We understood each other. I refreshed the page. 11:59:53, 11:59:57, 12:01. Status, inactive. Reversion triggered per clause 9b. Just like that, the name they'd built their entire revolutionary rebrand around became legally unusable. All their copy, all their packaging, all their launch assets, floating in limbo with no anchor to tie them to anything real. I sat back, closed the window, and stared into the silence. No sirens, no explosions, just the steady hum of a laptop fan and the slow, cold unraveling of everything they'd stolen. Not with fire, but with forgetting. The live stream kicked off at 9:00 a.m. sharp. I know because I had it open on two screens, one muted, one with the chat log scrolling like a slot machine from hell. The production value was high. Branded LED wall, empowerment playlist from Spotify's least convincing playlist curator, influencers in sleek jumpsuits laughing like they understood the product. It was all so clean, so rehearsed, so empty. I recognized the opening line from the copy they'd scrubbed me out of, slightly reworded but still mine. We're not just launching a brand, we're redefining a conversation. I could have choked on the irony. They had everything planned. Hashtag campaigns, a global time sync so followers in London, Dubai, and LA would see the same video, the same call to action, at the exact same second. Madison was center stage, all teeth and buzzwords, hair curled into submission. "Welcome to a new era," she said, palms out like she was offering communion, and then it happened. Right at 9:02 a.m., the homepage link pinned to every social platform, every QR code, every influencer bio, every press release, domain not found. No flourish, no redirection, just that. Black text on a blank white screen, cold, merciless. At first, the audience thought it was a bug. The chat filled with anyone else, and refresh your browser. But the longer it stayed, the more confused it got. Confusion turned to irritation. Irritation turned to alarm. Wait. Is this real? This some kind of ARG? Did they just launch a brand that doesn't exist? On screen, Madison hesitated for a second, blinked twice, then forced her smile back on. "We're experiencing minor technical difficulties," she started. But the host platform detected the mismatch in the domain's ownership record and auto-triggered a lockdown. No DNS resolution, no fallback server. The CDN refused to serve cached assets due to invalid credentials. The SSL certificate expired within the hour. The machine I'd built, quiet, resilient, precise, wasn't broken. It was just no longer theirs. They hadn't renewed the license. They hadn't updated the legal ownership. And now the host had no authority to serve content under a domain name that was, as of midnight, unauthorized. And in that moment, everything fell apart. Madison froze mid-sentence. Not dramatically, not with some operatic gasp, just blank, like the script had been ripped from her teleprompter, and she didn't know how to improvise because no one had ever told her where the bones of this brand really lived. The influencer tried to jump in with a joke, "Guess we broke the internet." But the live stream chat was already a wildfire of sarcasm, mockery, and screenshots of the error page. Within minutes, tech journalists were picking it up. Brand launch debacle, new identity goes live with nothing. Major wellness brand loses domain during global reveal. Trademark dispute, DNS error, either way, someone screwed up. They scrambled behind the scenes. Madison's face disappeared from the stream as producers rushed to figure out why their entire digital identity had vanished into the void. But no one could find the answer, because the answer wasn't in a server crash, or a DDoS, or a back-end bug. It was in a single expired license. A clause no one had read. A name no one had truly owned. Their brand hadn't been hacked. It had simply stopped existing. And I didn't lift a finger. I closed my laptop and made another cup of tea. Rooibos, again. Something calm. In the silence of my kitchen, with the echo of their chaos spilling across social media like a tidal wave, I realized something. Sometimes you don't have to burn the house down. You just need to take back the deed. By 12:03 p.m., my phone buzzed with 3 texts in a row from people who hadn't spoken to me in months. "Are you seeing this?" They're in full-blown meltdown. "You evil genius, I owe you a drink." I didn't respond. I was busy reading a forwarded email from Elena. Subject line, "Emergency brand alignment huddle. All hands mandatory." It had been sent company-wide with red exclamation points and a desperate sense of urgency that no PowerPoint transition could hide. Inside the call, They were flailing, blaming the hosting provider, blaming their internal IT lead, blaming the influencer's team for using unstable platforms. And then, when no one could explain why the DNS couldn't be updated, why the SSL keys had auto-revoked, or why the trademark filing had suddenly disappeared from their control, they blamed me. The legacy brand manager must have done something, Madison spat, pacing in her heels like she was trying to outrun accountability. She probably planted a failsafe. Or worse, she's sabotaging us from the outside. She's bitter. You all saw the non-compete. But someone in legal, finally doing the job they should have done 6 months ago, was already deep in the archives, and what they found turned the whole room silent. Trademark, registered under my personal LLC, filed before incorporation. Domain, registered under my personal account, set to private renewal. Hosting, still routed through my original infrastructure, licensed under Clause 9b. Clause 9b. Rights revert to original holder upon termination of engagement or non-renewal of licensing terms. There was no breach, no hack, no sabotage, just a lapse in responsibility, an assumption that branding meant fonts and slogans, not ownership. Then came the kicker, the email thread. The one I'd sent to Madison's assistant the day I left. Short, polite. Attaching the updated license renewal invoice and the same sentence they never responded to. Please confirm the updated payment on the trademark license. There it was. Time-stamped, unread. That was all it took. The meeting transcript, sent to me later by a sympathetic mole, read like a courtroom drama. Legal. She warned you. It was in writing. No one followed up. CMO. How was I supposed to know she actually owned it? Legal. Because she registered it. Because she licensed it to us. Because you signed the severance without reviewing the license terms. Board member. Who was in charge of brand asset compliance during this transition? Madison. We assumed it was all transferred. Board member. You assumed. The influencer, bless her oblivious heart, posted a shaky front-facing Instagram story from the backseat of a car around 12:30. Hey guys. I'm going to be taking a little break from content. Just need time to realign with my, core truth and stuff. Mental health matters. Love you. The comments section wasn't kind. By 1 p.m., the board had convened a crisis team, the kind that comes with PR damage control consultants, forensic digital asset audits, and contracts printed in thick legalese. And while the chaos churned behind Madison's glass walls, I was sitting on my patio, watching my dog chase a squirrel and sipping sparkling water like it was champagne. They wanted a rebrand. They got one. One built on an error message and a silence they never bothered to read. By 2 p.m., their lawyer reached out to discuss possible restoration scenarios. I didn't answer. Not yet. Let them sweat a little longer. 2 days. That's how long it took for silence to grow teeth. No brand, no site, no revenue. Their influencer marketing firm issued a bland technical difficulty memo that fooled no one. Internally, they were bleeding morale and money by the hour, scrambling for workarounds that didn't exist. The domain couldn't be cloned. The trademark couldn't be circumvented. You can't pivot your way out of legal ownership. You can only acknowledge it. And eventually they did. The email came in at 9:14 a.m. from a junior partner at the agency. Polite, restrained, probably reviewed by 4 lawyers and a crisis comms specialist. We would greatly appreciate the opportunity to explore a limited scope consultation regarding brand asset restoration. Please let us know if you're open to a discussion. I read it twice. Then I drafted exactly one reply. Happy to license the assets under a lifetime agreement, fixed fee, payment upfront, no interviews, no credits, no public acknowledgement of involvement. It wasn't about ego, it was about clarity. They'd tried to erase me, so I made myself invisible on my own terms. The contract was signed within the hour, funds wired by close of business. A copy of the executed agreement showed up in my inbox, complete with an NDA so airtight I could have suffocated in it. That was fine. I didn't need to speak. I'd already said everything that mattered with a clause they never bothered to read. By Monday, the site was live again, quietly. No launch video this time, no countdown clock, just a reactivated homepage with softened tones and a slightly revised mission statement. The influencer was gone. Madison had taken a leave to explore other creative pursuits, according to an internal memo leaked to me in confidence. She'll probably resurface next quarter selling gluten-free candles or personal branding workshops for startups who don't know better. But the best part? the new homepage tagline: centered, elegant. Barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Heritage meets innovation. Not a word about the brand's collapse, not a whisper about what went wrong, but I knew, and they knew, because that heritage, that was mine. The voice, the vision, the bones. They could strip the skin and repaint the walls, but the architecture was still mine. And now, thanks to that license, it always would be. I didn't frame the contract. I didn't celebrate, I just filed it in the same fireproof box where I kept the original trademark. And then I opened a blank document and titled it simply, Next.